And next we're going to listen to another great supply chain executive, also highly ranked in our top 28 of supply chain executive Europe, and that's Sami Naffakh from Reckitt. Sami?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, all right. So, look, I know it's right after lunch, so I'm gonna try to not make you fall asleep too fast. I just want to say before I start, I just want to say a few things. First, I'm super happy to be here, so thanks a lot, Martin, for inviting me. It is super cool to be back face to face and to meet people and to discuss. So that's a great pleasure. I also would say that I've been super impressed by what I've seen this morning. You know, I think what you're putting together and the kind of entrepreneurship and the kind of solutions that are coming up are just absolutely impressive. I would just resonate with what Tariq said. We probably need to work together on making sure that this is conveyed and this is understood. And then the last thing I would say is you will see a lot of consistency, if not redundancy, with what Tariq has showed. I don't know if Tariq is still here, but next time I'll ask him to send me his slide. Yeah, you're here. So next time you send me your slide, I'll put a Reckitt name on it, and my job is easier, because there's a very high level of consistency. But I think that actually shows that that supply chain across industries are pretty much facing the same environment, and that's what I'm going to say a few words about. So, before we go into this, just a few words about Reckitt. Some of you might not be familiar with Reckitt as a company because we don't communicate too much on the name in itself. But if you look at the brands on the top, they might be a bit more familiar to you. We have 3 divisions. One is doing home care, so brands like Finish. Another one is doing some healthcare with Gaviscon, Dettol, Durex, and Strepsil and these kinds. And then we do have some nutrition, mostly in the US. It's a pretty big company. It's about 13 billion, not as big as Sanofi, but it's 13 billion pounds of net revenue. It's not a new company. It's 200 years old, believe it or not, since Sir James Reckitt founded his first starch mill in Hull in the UK. You know, a bit more than 40,000 employees, and it is a pretty profitable and fast-growing business. As you can see, we've been growing just shy of 20% over the last 2 years, and we have a profitability which is probably within the highest in the FMCG industry. So this is Reckitt, if that can work. This is the supply chain of Reckitt, pretty similar to what Tariq was showing. So a bit less than 30,000 employees. That's internal. That doesn't include all the contractors that we're using. We've got 50 manufacturing sites, a lot of co-packers, as Tariq was saying in the case of Sanofi. That is reducing, but that's also changing, right? We're moving at fast pace from a global industrial model to a more regional one, so that might evolve in the coming months and years. We do have 100+ logistics centers. Again, a lot of consolidation there is been you know, reducing drastically. But it might be reversed as we seek more proximity and agility and a high level of complexity. It's a pretty complex business. We work across a large number of categories, a large number of geographies, a large number of technologies. So that adds a pretty high complexity to the whole supply. Just one slide on key challenges that we're at the macro level, right? At the 50,000 feet level, macro challenges that we're confronted with, and I think that goes pretty much aligned with what Tariq was showing. So a lot of volatility, a lot of unpredictability. So, you know, the ways of working of the past where things were reasonably stable and where you could have a reasonable view on what was going to happen in the next 12, 18, 24 months is gone. It's simply gone, and I don't see it coming back anytime soon. A lot of challenges around people. You've all heard about the Great Resignation. We're also going through major shifts and transformation that do require some new skills, so a lot of challenges on that side. A lot of changes on the consumer space, and Tariq alluded to it this morning. The way consumers behave today is very different from what they used to do not that long ago. The channel landscape is completely different. The way retailers are looking at things and their relationship with their suppliers is completely different. So a huge dynamic environment there. Of course, ESG is big. It's only going to get bigger, so that's and supply has a key role to play into this. And this is not just scope 1 and 2, but as we saw this morning with a presentation, scope 3 is more and more an area of focus. Digital revolution, no need to talk about it. It's pretty obvious. The last one is the one I hear the least about, but that to me is critical. And like others, we don't have a shitload of money. so there is a real question of where do you put your money? Because all these transformations do require cost, right? They do require money, they do require investment, they do require investment in capital, and they do require investment in operating expenses. And we're going to have to make some choices and some trade-offs. And those discussions are, you know, at least in our case, board and executive committee discussions. How we're going to fund that transformation that we must do because, you know, no one is going to wait for us, but it is going to require a significant amount of money, quite essential. Last slide before we talk with Carlos, and I'm not going to go through any shape of details on this. This is what we're working on. You can read by yourself. A lot of work around you know, ESG, a lot of work around customer and consumer. Of course, we want to drive operational excellence in everything we do. There's no point having some clear plans and good strategy if you cannot execute in the right way. Lots of work around people, and of course, we need to prepare for the future. The two things, and again, this is very consistent with what Tariq said this morning. The two things I would outline on this is that every single one of these boxes and work streams do require innovation in product, innovation in services, innovation in solutions, because all of that do require different ways of working and different tools in a much more dynamic environment than we had in the past. And the second thing is that it does require collaboration, the famous connecting the dots, right? We cannot work in isolation. We need to work in intense collaboration within the company, but also outside of business. It's more and more, you know, it's less and less a supply chain, it's more and more a supply ecosystem. It's not just about supplier and the manufacturer and the retailers and the consumers. There's many more parties in the game, and we need to be able to coordinate efficiently within that ecosystem if we want to drive all these transformation. And that's pretty much it. I don't want to, you know, bother you with too much monologue. And Carlos.
Thank you. So very, very much thank you for being so open and also being so consistent and looking at what Tariq was saying. So one interesting thing we were discussing, and I should say that we had the breakfast together, and yesterday we spent half of the afternoon together also. You were explaining that in some cases you develop things internally, and that was a surprise to me. We have a lot of people trying to develop new solutions and so on, but specifically in one example you said, no, we developed something internally, it's very useful, we didn't find anything. Why is that, and what will be the advice that you will give people, say, you know, that's what we require, no, we didn't find that. Why that happens? It seems that everybody should say, we should set an app in the iPhone that solves my problem, it's not there.
Yeah, look, and I think, you know, having thought a bit about the points since our discussion this morning, I see three reasons. So what we did, just to give a bit of context and without going into too much details, the one thing we developed internally is a set of digital tools to work with the huge data we have on procurement. So whether we're looking at spend visibility and analytics, it might seem obvious to know exactly what you spend where and how much costs something somewhere. It is actually not straightforward at all. So getting that visibility, getting the analytics behind it so that you can drive decision, understanding what the theoretical cost of a given material should be based on the market dynamics versus what we pay, all of that does require some pretty heavy tools. We simply did not find in the market anything that was fulfilling those requirements. And then when we started to talk to the BCG and the McKinsey of these words, we just felt that given the price they were asking for it, we'd better hire ourselves data scientists and do it ourselves, which is what we did. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is I'm a firm believer in the need of building our own capabilities and muscles internally. So I'm not talking about having a full-scale vertical integration, but if we're saying that digital is essential and that having people in the business who have those skills is essential, then we have to do it. So that's also a way of developing this kind of data sciences muscle. And the last reason is what Tariq alluded to this morning, which is I'm sure that there might be some startups doing some tools or working on some tools which would have fit our needs, but we just couldn't find them. So I think there's a need to work on how do we connect the solution providers on one side and the buyers on the other side.
if you look a little bit forward into that, one of the things that you do in Reckitt is you have a lot of subcontractors, you have a lot of other companies. So that I imagine that managing all these relations is going to be, as you say, the orchestration. But you mentioned that this is even beyond the suppliers, all this orchestration. So what are the challenges and what do you see the need? What are the benefits of, as you say, managing all this ecosystem?
Well, look, the first answer that comes to my mind is that you need to understand what's going on, right? So if we take a topic like ESG, and let me take an example which I think is quite specific. We have, as a manufacturer, we have to ensure, and we commit to ensure, that the ingredients we buy are, respecting the environment, the human rights, the biodiversity, etc., etc. Take palm oil. I buy from something like hundreds of meals, and those meals are buying from thousands of farmers. Now, no one cares about that. At the end of the day, I'm responsible. And if I want to be able to fulfill my public commitments, and also what we believe as a business is right, I need to have that visibility at the very granular level and understand exactly what's going on. So that's where having those tools that provides that visibility is essential.
But in that sense, everybody's buying a lot of palm oil, so that will look like you will need to collaborate with all the other CPGs, everybody else who's buying those palm oils.
And it's that's another very good question, Carlos. So you're absolutely right, and I'm a firm believer in, those kind of topics should not be competitive differentiation. We should all work together. This is not necessarily the case yet. There is some association where people are sharing, et cetera, but there's still a number of companies who believe that doing it by themselves in their own way is going to provide them a competitive edge. So that's one element. And the other one, and let's face it, right? There's still a bit of greenwashing. There's still a bit of gap between what people are saying and the commitment they take and how deep they do in fulfilling those commitments. Now, I think that is going to be, that is certainly moving in the right way. There's more and more focus in breaking those barriers and removing this greenwash, but there's still a bit of that today.
Mm-hmm. Another different angle. To me, Reckitt is very interesting because hygiene products. So during the COVID, things consumption went over the roof. I'm saying that because my wife was having, I think, all of your products at home, and when you entered the door, she was spraying you with all of them. So if you wouldn't die by COVID, you will die by having so much alcohol and different things there. And at some point in time, I suppose that the consumption will go down, then it will go up. So much more volatility than before. Is that something that you have felt, and how have you tried to manage that in a successful way?
So, and you're absolutely right. And just to give you a bit of dimension on this, hand wash disinfectant went up by a 25-fold, right? So the demand went up 25 times between March 2020 and June 2020. We did have a lot of, that's the most extreme, but we had a lot of product that went up by 2, 3, 5 folds, and then went down again. And now if you look at our cold and flu portfolio on the health side, it's up 60% versus last year. So there's huge swings. The answer to your question is that in the initial stage, it was really acrobatics, right? Set up, build up additional capacity with the suppliers, set up additional co-packing, co-manufacturing capacities, build additional internal capacities in record time, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the view, and at least that's my view, is that we're still going to have this volatility and these massive swings for quite some time. So it's all about sprint capacity. We're now structurally thinking on how do we make sure that at any point of time we can ramp up and ramp down very quickly capacity, at least on the number of products where we believe that we will have this huge volatility. And this is not just our own capacity, this is also the supplier's capacity. So that's where the focus is.
Because that means, and you have been fighting with lower costs, but that capacity costs money.
Yes. Yes.
So how do you do the trade-off now? Up to which point, and how are these discussions going on with your colleagues in the C-suite?
And you said it. It's all a question of trade-offs. There is not magic recipe. There is not a formula that tells you if it's A, you invest. If it's B, you don't invest. It's all a question of. There are two questions actually, because you don't build the capacity when you have the demand. It's too late, right? You build the capacity in advance. So the two questions is it worth the risk? So do I have the appetite to build that capacity that I might need, but I might not need? And the second question is, even if I've got the demand, does the financial justify building that capacity? But you're right, you're absolutely right. The P&L shape is changing significantly versus what it was pre-COVID.
Also, and maybe this is a little bit the last part of the questions I want to have is, we were talking about sustainability, we were talking about Scope 3, and also we were having a conversation of what happened in the last investor call. So how important is that, and what you can do or you cannot do there?
So no, look, I very much love, by the way, the scale up working on Scope 3. So I'm probably going to reach out after this meeting. We're pretty similar to what Tariq was saying in Sanofi. More than 60% of our CO2 emission are related to Scope 3. Now, on Scope 3, there are two things, right, in our side. If I'm looking upwards on the supply side, it's back to the previous discussion. It's all about visibility. It's all about understanding what's going on, where are we creating the more, the highest emissions in CO2, and then how do we work on this? On the downward stream, it's really about using the power of the brands. So it's really using the brands as a vehicle to educate the consumers and therefore to reduce the impact of the consumer. And we're not the only one doing this, right? Unilever is doing this very well. Procter is doing this very well with Ariel, etc. But it's all about, if I take our case, it's all about educating the consumer that if you use a tab, a dishwasher tab, your impact, whether you look at energy or whether you look at water on the environment, is much less than if you keep washing your dish manually or even pre-rinsing. It is that if you have a highly efficient tabs, you don't have to wash at 55 or 60 degrees. You can wash at 40 degrees or at 30 degrees, etc. So it's really about, and that's going to take time, but this is about really using the power of the brand to educate and vehicle those key principles. On top of which, of course, working on circular economy, so that we get into that virtual loop of closed and circular economy.
But then talking precisely about the circular economy, there is always, let me use one example. As I live in Switzerland, there is a company, a very interesting company, that are trying to use a model of subscription for tennis shoes. And even Roger Federer is investing in the company and so on. And the challenge they have is they say, yeah, we can make a subscription model for you, so you can get the shoes, but how do we do the return once the shoes are used to recycle them? Because that return, the CO2 footprint of that circular economy is huge, given that they have customers all over the world.
No, and you're absolutely right. And again, this is I'm not aware of anyone who's got a well-oiled and an efficient model on circular economy. But what's for sure is that you need to work, of course, you need to work with the recyclers, you need to work with the authorities because you've got to have some kind of setup for a circular economy. You need to work with the NGOs who are going to be helping doing the whole thing, and you need to work with transportation because you also, circular economy without green logistics doesn't work, to your point.
Yeah.
So, again, back to my point on the ecosystem, this is a typical case where you've got to manage the ecosystem, and every player of the ecosystem has to be going in the same direction if you want to be successful.
Now, if we add all of this, we were in a world where in supply chain we used to have several requirements and one objective: provide the quality, the service level, and minimize the cost. That's it. Now, ESG is coming with 17 objectives. And on top of that, we need to work on how to leverage the supply chain in order to generate more revenue. We need to reduce costs. Are we going to be able? Do we have the people to be able to do that?
I wish I could say yes. No, look, it's back to my point. That to me is one of the key challenges, right? Beyond all the disruptions, all the difficulties, etc. Where do you put your capital and where do you put the resources and how you prioritize against all these dimensions that you're going through is at the time, by the way, when people are really getting tired, right? We have to recognize that people in supply chain generally, and I think that applies to everyone, are really getting tired after 3 years of constant firefighting and battling. So that discussion on how do you recognize, the level of fatigue that you have in the organization, and therefore how do you make sure you prioritize effectively rather than just putting on top is essential. So again, I don't have a magic formula, but my only answer to what you were saying is that this is a systematic discussion. And then
it's the issue of developing the talent and so on. We're also commenting that. So there is I'm a professor, so I see quite a lot of people interested in supply chain. But at the same time, I see a lot of fatigue. We were commenting about the great resignation, and a lot of people in supply chain is moving. Is moving to different jobs, and everybody is saying, we cannot find people, it's very difficult. And we were commenting about, yeah, how do you invest, how do you develop the people in your organization, if you do that or not?
Yeah, look, and you have to. And do we do this? Yes. Do we do it enough? Probably not. And we need to reflect on this, and we need to reflect that you know, we've gone probably a bit too lean on that area, and given the situation with a lack of the scarcity of people, and it's not just scarcity of people overall, but within supply, it's tough. It's tough jobs. So you know, we see a lot of youngsters giving a try and ending up elsewhere because it's just too intense. So we need to recognize that, and we need to invest more into this development and training and education. But we also have to reflect upon the fact that young generations today are very different from what they were 20 years ago, right? They clearly are thinking in a completely different way than what I was thinking 20 years ago. Their priorities in life is different, and you know, there's a lot about work-life balance. There's a lot of purpose. There's a lot more attention about, do you have a, you know, is there something bigger than just top and bottom line, etc. So we have to recognize that, and we have to address that to retain people. One thing is to attract them, another thing is to retain them.
Mm-hmm. And finally, a little bit repeating what I was asking Tariq. You also said similar advice to Tariq, to entrepreneurs, to new companies, that they are trying a little bit to. It's interesting that you said one of them, you're going to contact them, so it's a value of being here, and it's a value for you being here, being able to connect. But any other advice that you would say to those who are starting companies in supply chain, focus on that, think about this, what considerations should they take into account?
Look, I'm just going to shamelessly repeat what Tariq said, because I totally concur with what you said. One is you've got to focus on the problem you're trying to resolve, not on the solution you're offering. Because if your solution doesn't match a problem, then there is no interest. It's a bit brutal, but it's a harsh reality. And to be able to answer that question, you need to understand what the problem is, what are people confronted with. And that's the other point that Tariq made, which is you need to connect with the right people. I'm not the right one to be able to understand in details what's going on, you know, what's giving a headache to my planners or my buyers, etc. They know. So you need to make those connections effectively. Those would be really the two ones that I would point out.
Okay. So thank you. We are on time for a Spanish professor. It's amazing. Any question? Let me allow. Any one of you want to ask a question to Sami? Because we have not done that. Anybody will raise their hand. By the way, Sami, I'm very interested in that. No? Too shy? Come on, we're in the Netherlands. Go ahead. Oh.
We've been violently clear.
Question about how do you work with startup? Do you have like a startup program, like incubator or something?
So the question is, how do you work with the startups? Do you have an incubator? Do you have a startup club, something like that?
Yeah, we have an incubator. I think as a number of other companies have. But the incubator is quite specifically focusing on e-com related topics, right? So e-com logistics, e-com planning, etc. We're having some discussions on how we widen this. Now, the problem with the incubator, I mean, it's not a problem. The fact with the incubator is that it does take a lot of time, right? To screen everything which is available and to understand whether there's something that matches your needs, etc., etc. So it's back to the point that don't expect companies within an incubator to do all the work for you. There's also a need for the startups and the scale-ups to connect to the businesses, to understand, not connect with, oh, I've got this fantastic tool, would you be interested? No, to connect, which I understand your business, I understand your business model. I think I've got something to offer for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sami. Thank you for being with us.